Technology Complexes. This is our 403rd meeting since we started in February 2009. We put a speaker on every week, a different subject. We require a speaker to take a position on an issue or express a point of view. They have to be for or against something. We don't care what it is. We give them an hour to make a presentation. If anybody interrupts the speaker, we remind the interrupter to listen to, we only listen to one fool at a time. That's one of our rules. Then we have questions and answers of the speaker from the audience, not speeches. Then we have remarks, rebuttals. Everyone in the audience who wants to gets 5 minutes at the podium to respond to the speaker said for or against. That's how it works. And then our speaker gets the last word. It's a comment and close the meeting. But before we introduce our speakers, we have time for announcements. Anybody have any announcements they want to make? Now's the time. Any announcements? Here's somebody coming with an announcement.
Well, I haven't done it for a few weeks, so it's probably time for me to orate a little bit. But we are really glad that you guys all came out tonight. What a beautiful day we had today in March. I mean, it's like late May.
Okay by me.
We'll probably have some more cold weather, and that's just kind of normal for Texas, but at least it doesn't stay the same all the time. Except when the August, whatever we ought to call it, comes. We are glad you're here. If any of you are here for the first time tonight, and you would like to get our notices in the meetings, be sure you give Tom your name and your email tonight so he can put you on the list and get you included in that. I don't think it'll cause you any disruption, and he won't try to sell you anything. But we're glad you're here, and Tom gave you all the instructions, and he said you get to listen to one fool at a time, so I guess I get to be fool number one tonight, right? But anyway, I'm sure we'll have an enjoyable time tonight. Our discourse always makes things interesting, and so we invite all of you to participate. If you have any questions, be sure you take advantage of the question time with the speaker. And please do try to remember, this is my, my instruction. Please remember that the section 2 on questions is for questions. It's not for your comments or oration about what the Dallas Cowboys are going to do this year. And sometimes we do get off track with that. It's easy to do. And it's particularly hard for people who have not participated in the group, and it sort of gets to be automatic. But we do invite the questions, give the speaker time to respond to those, and sort of fill out what they've put in their presentation. And then we get to get up for 5 minutes and give our own thoughts on the subject. And we might agree with the speaker, we might disagree with the speaker, or we might add something to what the speaker's laid up on the table for us. So that always proves to be interesting. But again, thanks for coming tonight, and we hope you all enjoy it. Thanks. On to Hank. Better stuff.
Hi.
Hello.
How? Is anybody here got extra time on, what is it, March 18th? I just found out about this event for people who got time on their hands. This might be really good for you if you're bored. They're going to pretend to blow up the Majestic Theater and take you to hospital. So they're looking for crisis actors. So report to the city of Dallas will do it. You have to sign a waiver that no matter what happens, you can't sue anybody. It's called no harm waiver. I guess you guys are all too busy. Okay. That's March 18th.
Well, I can have, this just like to remind everybody, the Dallas Philosophers Forum is meeting this coming Tuesday the 13th at the Yellow Phoenix on Skillman and Adelia. And I forget exactly what we're talking about, but it'll be an intellectually stimulating subject. This week, this Tuesday.
Any other announcements? I guess we're through with the announcements. Next week is an examination of the current status of the FBI's investigation into Russian meddling in the 2016 election. That's by David Wasserman. That ought to be good. And it's on your itinerary there. I'm not going to read all this. March 24th on the importance of understanding the distinction between service dogs and emotional support animals. Dr. Daniel Hurley, he's a family practice physician until he had a motor vehicle accident, and he was out of work for some time, and now he's back. But he has service dogs. He needed it would saved him from anyway. He'll be here to talk. Should be good. And there are more in there. You can read it all. I'm not going to read all this. Anyway, our speaker tonight is Gary Foster. He's going to talk about ending Indian Mascots Now. He's an MS, Texas A&M Commerce, BS, University of Central Oklahoma. He's a Cherokee and Pawnee. He will discuss end Indian Mascots Now. He will share information on the opportunities left in the Dallas area to work towards ending the mediocratization and commercialization of American Indian culture and people. From the Washington Redskins and the Keller High School Indians, Gary will separate what is actually done from good intention and detail some of the social, psychological, and cultural damage done by continued idea of, quote, having an Indian mascot for our team, unquote. He argues that and concludes that it results in a choice between a bird, a mammal, or an Indian as a team mascot, relegating Indians to being non-human, which shouts for rectification. So without further ado, please give a very, very warm welcome to Gary Foster.
So I think Tom said it all. So I'll tell you how many Indian mascots that exist in Texas public schools. In Dallas 18 years ago, without so much as a huff or a puff, the Dallas ISD did away with about 45 Indian mascots without any kickback and without any effort really, except to do the right thing. So it can happen, and as you know, one of the professional sports teams has said next year that they're willing to do that, and or at least take the cartoon figure of the Indian off of their logo. So let's see how I do at operating this thing. So there's a group called I Care, Indian Citizens Against Racial Exploitation. They operate in the Dallas and Texas area. You may or may not know it. There are somewhere between 40 and 45,000 American Indians in North Texas. Most of us, like me, Donald Trump has already said they don't look like Indians, and so yes, that's true. If you try to stereotype us by look, then you're not going to get it. You're going to be wrong a lot of the time. In the nation, there are 560 or so recognized tribes, and the important thing about that is that each tribe has a completely different culture, completely different worship system, completely different things that are important to them or not important to them. So to say Indians and think that that means every Indian is just an absolutely ridiculous concept. Indians are divided easily into Indian, Pueblo, Eskimo, or Pacific Islanders. And if you are a Pueblo Indian, a Hopi would be an example of that, then you really don't like being called an Indian. That's somewhat of a slur. You want to be called a Pueblo person, and Eskimos prefer to be Eskimos. So I've made the point that each tribe is a nation, and I want to just kind of fill you in that 200 or so years ago, Indians sort of had to choose whether they were going to become anglicized or whether they were going to remain what we call traditional. So they had to decide basically whether to be Christianized or whether to remain in their traditional culture. And for almost every tribe, and this is very much a generalization, but for most tribes that I know, there are traditional people that don't want anything to do with non-traditional cultured folks. So my point there is that to them, to those people who never gave up their original culture, to those people who still speak their native language, which is probably in the millions, I'm guessing, that's all you'll hear. You go out to Wyoming and you'll hear the Sioux speak nothing but Sioux and Lakota. And you go to Tahlequah, Oklahoma, and you'll hear English and you'll hear Cherokee. By the way, how is not a greeting from Cherokee tribe. That's just a made-up word for the Westerns. For the Cherokees, proper greeting is OCO, which generally translated means that it's good for us to see each other again, even if you and I haven't ever met. So the concept that we are never not here, that we're never not part of somebody's life is an abstract thought. I don't know which way to go. 190, okay. So my proposition to you, I'm supposed to take a stand, is that we completely eliminate Indian mascots. And they exist in schools, public, private. There's a Christian school somewhere in Dallas called the Warriors for Christ or something. I don't know what I can't remember the name of it, but when I saw that I was like, you've got to be kidding. So I think that they should be eliminated in any educational entity, preschool, elementary, middle school, high school, junior college, college, Little League sports teams. There's nothing cool about putting a smiling Indian logo on a 4-year-old kid and telling him that that's what Indians are like. Nothing cool about that. Park and recreation teams outside of Little League, professional and organized sports teams, and I'm not going to spend too much time on the Washington Redskins, but I can tell you that anytime I hear the name, anytime that I think that they're coming to Dallas, I would like to get sick to my stomach, but I'm too mad about that. So professional and organized sports teams have made millions of dollars off of selling little trinkets that make their customers feel good. And scouting has so much indoctrination about a completely false culture of what is it to be an Indian and what is Indian value. And it may not be mascots, but boy, is it there. And I know I went to an Indian art exhibition with about 10 other friends that are Indian at the Dallas Museum of Art. And they had a little table set up. People don't, I mean, truly, if you haven't had somebody like me tell you that's wrong, then here's what they were doing for the kids. Cute idea. For the kids, they had little, what do you call that colored paper that you, construction paper. And they had scissors and they could cut out little feather things and put them around their heads. So they were taking these 2, 3, and 4-year-old kids and teaching them that, you know, if you did that and you went woo, 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 then that means that you've been to the museum and you learned about Indians. And nothing could be farther from the truth, and really nothing could be more insidious, in my opinion, than to culturally embed that in little kids. It's unbelievable to me. Indians certainly are not the only race of people, but I'm going to make a point in a minute that we seem to be the only one that people go, well, we're honoring them by calling them Redskins. Or it's okay for us to have a warrior and dress up some white girl to go out on the field and dance in a little skimpy buckskin thing that has nothing to do with Indian culture, and everybody claps and buys their tickets. There are 2 Redskins teams in Texas, 3 chieftains, 1 Comanche. You can guess where that is, Comanche, Texas. 8 Apaches, and there is a Lipan tribe. So if it was gonna be okay, which I don't think it is, but you will find another Indian that'll go, what was he talking about? There's nothing wrong with that. And you'll find a serious argument there. But if it was gonna be okay, in Apache, Texas, and the Lipan Apache tribe is located there, and if the Lipan Apache tribe said that that was okay, then I can kind of get it. But outside of that, the papooses, have you got to be kidding? That you would name, there's no such thing. We all know what that means. We were taught in the Westerns that means that you're an Indian baby. There's no such thing as papoose. Redskins is the most violent, in my opinion. Chief is probably the most degrading, and I'll show you why in a second. Well, I don't know, it's a toss-up. Redskins. Sorry, this is real sensitive. I bet nobody can read that. So it says what is, sorry? For Native American scholars and leaders, including the National Congress of American Indians, the term redskin originated in the practice of paying a bounty for killing Indians, which began in the colonial period and continued to be completely neutral to people. That was okay. Nobody was upset that American Indians were having their hair and their scalp removed and brought into the governors in the colonial period. In the book American Holocaust, David Stannard cites an account from the King Philip War way back. This is the quote, hunting redskins for the time being became a popular sport in New England. So how in the world is it that a professional football team in the nation's capital, which I guess has its own problem, it may not be a popular thing right now, But how is it that that's cool to have a football team out there and two teams in Texas, probably at high schools, whose belief is that it's okay to hunt redskins for the time being because it's a popular sport? And that's the justification for it. The details of bounties paid for collected scalps were shown in the proclamation declaring war against the Penobscot Indians in 1755. That would be southern New York, issued by Lieutenant Governor Spencer Phipps, known as the Phipps Proclamation. The proclamation specified the different amounts to be paid for the scalps of men, for the scalps of women, and for the scalps of children. They weren't all worth the same. Eventually, government bounties would be offered for Native American heads or scalps in at least 23 different states, territories, which would include probably almost all of the states. So this redskin thing really gets to me. There's nothing, in my opinion, funny about it. It's certainly a derogatory term, and I've heard some mighty good explanations of why it's an honorable thing, but I don't agree with it. So what is it about stereotypes? We all do that. I think we have to admit it. We stereotype people as short or tall, dark or light, old or young. So in social psychology, a stereotype is any thought widely adopted about specific types of individuals or certain ways of behaving intended to represent the entire group. So the Atlanta Braves with their tomahawk chop thing and everybody in the stands going, I don't know what that song that they were singing, but it had nothing to do with Indian culture. I've been to 200 or 300 powwows. I've never heard the tomahawk chop. It's not certainly in anywhere in American Indian culture. And most Indians, although not all, don't carry around a tomahawk with them. And if they do, it should be identified with the tribe and the purpose for which it was to take an animal spirit for food. So when we do that, when we act ways that group the entire group together, as we do when we name a team Indians, and then we act in a way that represents. Yeah, do I need to be quiet? I'd be glad to stop. These thoughts or beliefs obviously just cannot accurately reflect reality. When we look at one person and expect them, or one tribe, or one type of Indian and expect them to be representative of all Indians, it's close to insanity. So I'm going to rattle on more about stereotypes. They're widely held. We know it. We know that there are stereotypes, and they don't change. That's horribly ugly. Stereotypes are always an oversimplified image of somebody. Well, they're all like that. And I won't go into Indian stereotypes, but there are many. And so then to put cartoons on little kids' helmets and tell them to go out there and be the Indians is just mesmerizing to me. So it's an idea about a particular type of person that represents the whole group. So I said it twice, and so there's really no way that you could have an Indian mascot that represented all Indians. You just couldn't do it. So obviously, I think that diversity in our world is a gift. But it's important to remember that diversity is based on how we look at things in the past. So we know that there were Indian wars. We know that sometimes Indians attacked. Most of the times the U.S. government attacked. So that's the past. But there's also the present. And I think that gets lost in this whole concept of Indian mascots. What is the present like? What is the reality of American Indians now? Well, I already told you there's 42,000 registered American Indians in North Texas. By the last census, it's the largest growing population percentage-wise. So we're here. And you don't see us. And I think this is a good example. This guy is a Cherokee from probably, looking at that dress, probably about 1800. And Cherokees had banks and public schools and alphabet that they called the syllabary. 3 years after the Cherokee syllabary was written, there was 98%, what do you call that when people can read? Literacy, thank you. Literacy in the Cherokee tribe. 3 years. They were that serious about teaching, and they were that serious about kids learning. So this idea that you have of warriors or poor Indians. There were apartment complexes. Everything was owned in common, and it was very much a huge society of people. And I particularly want you to remember that you've never seen a football team with a cheerleader dressed like that. That's important to me. That's the past, and here's the present. Can you pick the chief? He's there. So think of all of the images that you have seen of American Indians on football helmets and shirts, or posters, or on television. Can you find the chief in the picture? The chief of the second largest tribe in the entire country. And he's the guy second from your left, in the back. He's obviously not one of the girls. And he looks like anybody else in this room. And he dresses when he's not at a ceremony like anybody that's in this room. And he controls, in the case of the Cherokee tribe, he controls an impact, 14 counties in Oklahoma, an impact on the state of Oklahoma of $2 billion. Now up there, that's a lot of money. That the Cherokee Nation owns property and brings water and electricity. So this idea of warriors and papooses is just missing the mark of respect for anybody else. Here's unfortunately what we're told that a mascot is. That is the image that you've lived with. That is the image when somebody says Indian. I know it is. That's what you think about. Some guy with the headdress, some guy with the tomahawk, some guy, I don't know where they get the spear thing. I really don't. But some guy with a spear. Keller Indians use a spear. So just rub it in a little bit. There's some more. The guy on the left, probably tomahawk, not tomahawk, Mohawk Indian, given the hair. And a pretty good representation, but doesn't belong on anybody's shirt. The Cherokees down at the bottom, did that look like anybody in the last picture I show you? This little kid, Cherokee 1970, with one feather in his head and a bow and arrow. Typical image, but certainly not respectful. And the youths, look at the face on this guy and tell me somehow that sends a good message about American Indian people, and tell me that doesn't, I challenge you to tell me that doesn't denigrate them, that somehow this thing, this cartoon character here, is somehow respectful and honorable. I don't think so. So let's flip that a little bit. And that was my point in the very beginning, that we needed to remember past and present, and we needed to remember that a stereotype takes one thing, one image, and applies it to the entire group, as if all Jews were the same, exactly the same. And that's what they look like, and that's what our football team should go fight for. And do you ever see a mascot that says that? Never. Only American Indians are cartoonized. Only American Indians are denigrated. Only American Indians, as Tom said in his introduction, are equated with mammals and fish and birds and Indian tribes. And it's totally dehumanizing. What if we called the team, instead of the San Francisco 49ers, why don't we call them the San Francisco Coolies? And let's see how that goes over to voters in California. You just don't do that with any group of people except American Indians. So it's obviously a misappropriation. So that means that when it's put to a wrong use, or the synonyms, when it's abusive, when it robs people, or when it's misapplied, and I'll say it again to the whole group, then it's a misappropriation, and misappropriation is wrong. It's not okay to rob anybody. It's not okay to abuse anybody, but it's okay to do it to American Indians. And I get kind of tired of it. Here's a right use. It says wrong use, but I showed you that on the past page. Now, when is it okay? This is at a powwow. I can tell you just by the picture, I don't recognize the tribe. There are only 2 or 3 tribes in the country that still have what are called tribal powwows. Powwow is not a meeting at a table. It's not respectful to say, let's powwow about that for a minute. That is a powwow. And that is the grand entry, and the grand entry goes on forever, and you stand while that's going on. And every dancer that's at the powwow eventually ends up out on the circle, because we are all together at a powwow. And these guys, and that's what I can see with my eyes, these guys that are leading the grand entry, you wouldn't believe the amount of hours that go into these things, the amount of money. It's not uncommon for somebody that'll lead it to spend $50,000 on their entire thing, and there are cases for that. It's called regalia. It's not called a costume. It isn't a costume. It is their tribal attire, but it's only intended to be used for tribal events. So let me give you an example to that. Native American Awareness Month is November. So in Oklahoma, the OU football team at halftime had the college American Indians, which you can imagine is a large group, out on the field, and they brought their tribal flags, and they were dressed just like me. And so why do you think? Why an OU football game on American Indian Awareness Time would they not dress up in regalia? And the answer is, it wasn't a ceremony. It wasn't a religious event. It wasn't a meeting for American Indians. It was a football game. So they were proud to represent their tribe by their flag, which has nation status. I've got my Cherokee ID in my pocket, and they tell me that'll work at the airport, but I'm not going to try. So what is defamatory? That's pretty bad. And really the point I want to make with this guy is some principal or some college president thinks that that's cute. Way to go, Bob, for being the most spirited person here and defaming American Indians better than the other 20,000 people that came to watch the football game. How can this be respectful, this thing, this grr look that's supposed to be a ferocious football player? And you saw the picture of the chief and his people at a meeting, and I don't think he looked like that. Even if you remember the pipeline, I'll call it a rebellion because it's the only word that I can think of. But even the pipeline rebellion, think about that. What were the American Indians that were there doing? Did you see anybody in tribal attire? It wasn't a ceremony. Did you see people talking or hear people talking in their native language? You betcha. Did you see people being violent? Not one American Indian reached out to be violent to their oppressors. So this is a myth, and it's been perpetuated now for about 400 years, and I think it's about time to give that up. Sorry, it's normal too. So I think I already made the point to you really that these regalia, these reasons that somebody would use an eagle feather, and eagles are not the symbol for all American Indian tribes. They're protected by federal statute. The one thing so far that's protected, it only has been protected about 20 years. It's a symbol of respect and honor and humbleness and truth and love and power and strength and courage and wisdom and freedom and everything that is positive. So why would you show off these people and think that scalping them is somehow an honorable thing to push? It's obviously believed then that there is some connection between the eagle and the creator. Should you so believe. So I think, Tom mentioned my degrees, and during my graduate work, one of the things we had to do was come up with our own definition of what is education. And my definition, uniquely mine, is to develop the individual to their fullest, no matter what this kid has, or what, in my case, I taught all the way up to graduate school, or no matter what this graduate student has in talent. My gift is to give them one more thing, or two, or as many as I can, until I've taught them individually everything that I can. So go back and think about that kid that was in the stands with the paint on his face. Think about that. And that the school is saying that's okay. That's part of your education. This is a good thing for you to learn. We're proud of you. So one of the things that when I spoke to the Keller ISD, one of the things that I asked the school board there was, so you guys are cool, I didn't say it like that, but you guys are okay with you being the Keller Indians from 1938. And I understand that. 1938, there were a lot of things culturally that were very different about Texas. In 1957, American Indians were declared human in Oklahoma. 1957, finally decided that we had a heart. So think about the opposing teams. Your team is the porpoises. And what do they do? Maybe some of you haven't been in a school so long now, but butcher paper is on Friday at school. Butcher paper is everywhere. And it's the girls have been working all night, and now the boys have been working all night painting up things like scalp the Indians and give the Redskins a haircut. And they put that up on the wall at the other school that has 1,000 kids in it. And those kids learn from the Keller Indians, who think that it's cool and that it's okay because it's been this way since 1938. That's their rationale. So think about the opposing teams. They each play 10 or 11 teams, and once a week, 1,000 kids or 2,000 kids in the other schools learn that that's okay to say things like that. Massacre the Indians. Shoot, I'm sure, the Comanches. What do the images teach students about Indians? And what kind of behavior do they indicate usually? And I missed my point. And then my question to you, I told you that I had a definition of education to develop the individual. And so I ask you simply, is that developmental? That kind of teaching kids en masse, that kind of behavior. So, one of the most touching things, this guy on the left is Chief. He doesn't look like any of them you've ever seen on a uniform. He's chief of the Chickasaw tribe, which is one of the most dynamic economies. Those guys are business people, and women are business people beyond belief. They own Lone Star Park as a start. They own 2 or 3 other businesses in Dallas. And their empire is very, very dynamic. They really do a good job. So think about the difference between this, which is what mascots teach, and this, which is the reality, that you have a chief who actually is making sure that everybody's got running water in a probably with the Chickasaws, a 4-county area, making sure everybody's got electricity and medical care. Think of the responsibility of that. But yet, what's taught is this is what an Indian is. One of the most touching things that I've heard is about a little girl. Her mother was telling me, she was sitting beside her. A little girl had gone to the 1st grade, and she went to her brother's high school football game, and one of the teams had an Indian mascot, and I think they were called the Chiefs. And the little girl, out of the mouth of babes, the little girl looked at Mom and said, "Mom, those don't look like our chief." It's common sense. It's not indicative. So think about what we do. We like to make fun. Unfortunately, we like to poke fun at people. So we're supposed to not teach kids to do that. That's the wrong thing to do. We're supposed to not teach, what is it now, probably 80,000 people in the stadium watching the Washington Redskins. We're supposed to teach them not to make fun of other people. That's one of our responsibilities, in helping each other get along, and we're not doing a really hot job of that. So the American Psychiatric Association has dealt with this. It's not just my opinion. And they came out with a statement about 10 years ago. That's not very long. That interestingly was after the Dallas ISD made their good decision to do the right thing. The use of American Indian mascots as symbols in schools and university athletic programs is particularly troubling because these schools are places of learning. These mascots are teaching stereotypical, misleading, and too often insulting images of American Indians. And I'm going to cut in there that it's not allowed for any other race of people in the country. These negative lessons are not just affecting American Indian students, they are sending the wrong message to all students, which I've already said. So I've also already said that it's not just schools. The name of my talk was End Indian Mascots, not End Indian Mascots in Schools. So the Washington Redskins by far takes the cake. There's nothing honorable about that. There's nothing honorable about an arrowhead being assumed to be something from all 560 tribes. I'd be willing to bet the Hopis were not big arrowhead people. So it's not okay, in my opinion, to do that. There's nothing that goes together with Indian ceremonies and Indian culture that we decide who are the Cherokee Braves. There's no such thing. It's myth. It doesn't exist. It's derogatory and it should end. So what do I think should be done? Well, of course, I think we should make it illegal. I particularly, that would be very hard. I have to admit that. And I remember I gave you the one caveat that if it wasn't, that the only time that I could possibly see it is if there was permission from the tribe to use the tribe's name. And I would actually even tie that to that should not just be an executive decision, that there actually should be an election. And Indians were actually the first to come up with real democracy. So I think it should be illegal. I especially think in the case of the Washington Redskins, the Atlanta Braves, that allowing public funding and tax-free status for those stadiums we're literally paying them millions or billions of dollars to keep that crap going so that they will sell more tickets. And it does. It makes people happy to go there the next year and get another t-shirt with Redskins on it, and then wear that to school or work. I think that we should ban mascots from broadcast media. One thing that would make me happy, if we couldn't tie it to funding for tax-free status, if we couldn't make it illegal, then at least we could say it's not okay for broadcast media to broadcast it. That would cut off some of the spreading of the myth. And it's not legal. I don't understand it. There's a whole separate study called American Indian Law, and it's not allowed for a tribe to sue, for instance, the Redskins. There have been lawsuits tried, so don't feed me back. Well, there was a lawsuit, yeah, and it got thrown out. And there have been many, and believe me, We didn't do so well at getting our land back, and we're not doing so well at getting rid of Indian mascots. I say that. It's actually reduced quite a bit. So that's the end of it. Indians are people, and not mascots. They're human beings. And I think that Indian stereotypes should be stopped. That's it.
You just stay there and answer questions now.
Okay.
Whoa. Let's turn this on. Testing 1, 2.
Hello? Hello, it's hot. Hello?
Go for it.
Can I get his attention?
Try it now.
Just ask a question.
Put him back up here.
Try it now.
Hello?
Go for it.
Okay, I noticed you put up the president of your tribe, well, not president, the chief of your tribe a couple of times. He looked kind of like a college dean or maybe a casino owner. Is that also representative of the Indians? I don't know, you're the one stereotyping. I don't know why you're doing this identity politics thing and then say individuals the first thing, but the reputation of the average Indian now is not him, not that picture.
Is that a
That's,
question?
Well,
It was a
do they,
statement.
you know, do they, does that picture, or the picture, that photo op of that, whatever that little group was, represent American Indians as you want to represent them, as you think is honest, as truthful?
yes. We're not all dressed in buckskin.
Not where you're not, but are they dressed like him? I don't think so.
I am right now. That's all I
You don't
can
look
tell
like him to me. I don't know.
Well, maybe I didn't put on
You
the
was
tie.
dressed with a suit.
And actually, it wasn't him. I want to just say two things. One, you missed my point completely, because you said that what he looked like to me was a casino owner. So if you'd have thought that guy was from Latvia, and I told you that was a group of kids from Latvia that went to Oklahoma to a college to meet with the college dean, as you pointed out, then would you use that? Would you use that term? He looked to me like a casino owner? And that's exactly the point. That's exactly the point, that it is these stereotypes that you learned it. You got it down.
Yeah, I drove to Oklahoma, nothing but casinos. Choctaw Casino.
Okay, but every Indian, I wouldn't say nothing but every Indian is not a casino operator. Okay, so next question. Oh, no, that's the other point I wanted to make. I'm sorry. Actually, you said that guy, and there were two tribes that I showed you, the chief of the Cherokee tribe and the chief of the Chickasaw tribe, and I did that on purpose. We don't all look alike. Okay?
I'm wondering if a lot of this might have, and maybe you agree or can have something to say to enlighten us about this, but it seems like in studying history that a lot of the motivation to remove Indians from, or to genocide them might be because it was related to religion, that they weren't. It seems like a lot of the religion that was here in North and South America was wiped out as the, for instance, when the conquistadors went into South America, they basically took all the written works that were already in existence in various different, things that would.
Is there a question?
Yeah, I'm just wondering what you think about that, the destruction of the religion aspect as the existing Christian religions and other religions that were coming into the area, and how that might have been a motivating factor.
There's a great book by the assistant director of the National Museum of the American Indian on the Smithsonian. It's not a very big book, and if you really are interested in the topic, it's a good read. And the name of it and the whole content of it is Everything You Think About American Indians is Wrong. And now, so my point to that, I'm answering your question. My point to that is one of the fascinating things, I read it and I was mesmerized. I was like, my God, I didn't know that. And you're right, and you're also right about the conquistadors, and you're also right about the Dutch in Africa, that one of the ways to, whatever you call that, squash a population, to decimate another population, another culture, is to make it, make it take your religion. And I told you that in the beginning, that there still are very traditional American Indians that won't. There's a Dallas Indian United Methodist Church, and I was sitting there talking to Curtis. He's full-blood Choctaw, and he told me that his father died at 88, and I thought, well, that's a pretty good age to die at. And no, I hope nobody here is older than 88. But that was a ripe old age, and he said, he never went to the doctor. So both work, and we need to respect. We need, that's really what I'm asking for is respect. And you're right, it's undoubtedly the truth.
This may be a very mute point, but of the 560 tribes that rode horses or ponies, the bulk of them were unshod. Were not shoed.
Okay.
So that is one commonality among all the different tribes.
I have no idea that. I'll look it up in that book. Maybe it's in there. I don't know.
Gary, my question to you is, when you were attending elementary school.
I what?
When you attended elementary school, did you learn about Indians?
I grew up in Tulsa, and I do probably in the 6th grade, remembering that there was this little book, literally called The History of Tulsa or something, and somehow we were supposed to be proud that we were living in Indian land. So yeah, I went to Longfellow Elementary School, and we weren't the Indians. And I went to Will Rogers High School, who I will point out was Cherokee and lived catty corner to my grandparents. And Will Rogers was not the Indians; it was the Ropers. And so I never, interestingly, had to deal with that. So I don't know what it would be like to go cheer for that every week. Was that kind of the question?
The majority of us were taught beginning in elementary school that we were going to study Indians, and we learned the headdresses, and we learned about the longhouses and the medicine men and all the terminology and everything. And what you're telling me is a lot of myth that we learned, plus what we saw on TV.
Well, the part that I'll pick up there, I'm part Pawnee, and Pawnees have a roundhouse, not a longhouse, and I find that a really good example of what I said, that we tend to think, oh well, all Indians lived in teepees, or all Indians lived in longhouses, or met in longhouses, when the Pawnee met in roundhouses, and they're very, very serious about it to this day. No tribal meeting goes on except in the roundhouse.
Like other tribal cultures, historical information is passed down by word of mouth. a great deal. How would you recommend integrating accurate information about the Native American cultures into the educational system?
Yeah,
I mean, about their cultures, their societies, the way of life, their history, and the way that they live. How would you recommend integrating that information into the educational system?
well, are you through? I don't want to rush you, I just want to start answering when you're through. One, my talk was end Indian mascots, not teach American Indian culture to schools. So I'm just telling you
Well,
that,
it's kind of hard to say, well, they're portrayed this way, this is incorrect, this is wrong. And we're talking about education and teaching them wrongly. How would you integrate information to counter that?
it's a whole different hour-long talk. When you say them, there you go again. You're missing
The
the,
educational system.
well, you're missing the point. There's 560 living identified tribes. There were probably 1,400 or 2,000 when the death started, and to say them, I don't know that you can. I can answer your question. What would I do? I would let Indians write it, but I can tell you when your image of the silent Indian is completely wrong. And if you got them started, then it would be an awfully big book.
Maybe I can answer that question. It's called cultural geography or cultural anthropology.
Right.
Where you get specific to location, geography, and then the cultural list.
Thank you.
Yeah. But I would turn that into a question. So maybe let me ask you in reverse the question, because really you answered her question. So I would ask you a question. Do you really think that you could identify the Navajo, who really are Dene, not Navajo, they were given the name Navajo? Do you think that you could write a book that would be inclusive of the Seminoles in southern Florida, the Dene, which actually had their own Trail of Tears, they're not from New Mexico, and also the Malamute up in Alaska? You just can't really do that. And that's actually the point of my talk, is you can't let this idea of, oh well, let's identify Indian and we'll do it on our t-shirt. That you just can't do that. That's wrong. It's impossible.
Now I have a question. Okay, one question I have, I guess, is, I mean, I've been reading a lot of histories of indigenous peoples recently and movements of different peoples around. There's some very good stuff out on YouTube on these kind of things. I've run into several examples where they're saying that the settlers were brought in to Texas to deal with the Comanche problem. That the Comanche were basically, I'll say, use a more modern phrase, they were kicking butt with everybody, even the other tribes. And anyway, your comment on that.
There's Quanah Parker was the chief of the Comanches, and this is just trivia. If you go down to the old red courthouse, on the front side facing the lawn, there's a plaque there to Quanah Parker that states that it was the only American Indian tribe and he was the only chief that never got captured, that never succumbed, so to speak. Now, but see, there you go, there I go, because in Cherokee tribe, there are 4 different clans, 7, I'm wrong, I get Pawnee and Cherokee mixed up. See, there I go. So there are 4 different clans, and so even to use the word Comanche is a toughie. I mean, it's really, really a tough, and that's why this mascot thing bothers me so much. That's not, there's nothing representational about American Indian culture in that. And we love to cheer and buy cups with the logo on it.
I grew up in California where we studied the Navajo, very peaceful Native Americans that were cliff dwellers. So I really, as a child, wasn't made aware of the warrior type image. But it seems like it would take hours and hours to study Native Americans all over the country. I don't know how one could do that without taking special courses and all.
Oh, very, very easy. There are, I didn't Google them before I came, but you can. You can get a master's degree or a PhD in American indigenous cultures, usually is what it's called. You can get a law degree in American Indian law. I don't know if there's a medical school, so I'm actually serious. I don't know if there's a medical school that actually has a degree in traditional medicines, but I'm betting there are quite a few tribal colleges, and I'm betting that there's at least a nursing degree or something. So, fair point.
A follow-up to Jana's question. I know when I first started teaching in Dallas schools, some of my teacher friends that were African American told me about the tribes of Africa, that they followed their ancestors to find out which tribe they belonged to in Africa. So the tribal thing is something that would be a specialization, in my opinion, that people that would want to study their own culture would study that. And I was wondering if I read the book Killers of the Flower Moon about the Osage Indians.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
And I was absolutely astonished that I'd never heard of it. The fact that it happened was incredible, but the fact that I'd never heard of it was even more incredible. And I wonder, do you know other books of other tribes that have information like that?
I'm not familiar with the book. I can tell you.
It was about the murder of the Osage Indians.
Yeah,
who had
probably written by Angie DeBow, maybe? A lady at the University of Oklahoma named Angie DeBow. And I don't know that book, so I don't, and it is, but I can tell you about Osage murders. And I can tell you this, that I want to go back to African tribal. One of the things that, and this is the difference, we seem to be okay with doing it, grouping all Indians together when we actually do know how distinct they are. One of the toughest other comments that I've ever had to me, I told somebody once, I was at a political thing, and I said, my grandmother lived behind Will Rogers, and I'm part Pawnee, and my grandmother signed the roll. You had, in order to become a tribal member and get tribal benefits like food and land in the Indian Territory, you had to sign up that your name was Gary Foster and that it was no longer your traditional name. And my grandmother is listed as took no white name, and which is typical of me, that she was so stubborn that she just said no. And what's the point to that? You mentioned Africa, and one of the toughest things that's been said to me is by an African American was, I wish that I knew as much about my heritage as you do yours. And that's tough. That's tough to me. So get back to your question. I'm gonna go back one question back. You said you lived in California and the Navajo were cliff dwellers. Well, you pegged it. You pegged it because that means that they were Pueblo people, and all of the Navajo are not the same. So that's more close to being a Hopi, or I can't remember. Okay, so the Osage and did it have to do with oil? The book?
The Osage?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's.
And the FBI, origination of the FBI, that's where the FBI originated, was the investigation of those murders.
Fascinating. I can tell you why the murders took place. In Oklahoma, and you can just picture this, the Cherokee, by the way, gave the Osage their land because they didn't have any. The government didn't make room for them, so they gave away all the best oil land in Oklahoma to the Osage. But the writing that I know of that has to do with Osage murders was written by a lady named PhD named Angie DeBow, D-E-B-O, and published by the University of Oklahoma Press. And so here's how it worked. And here's how it worked. If you were Osage, and many Osages found oil on their land in the 30s and 20s. If you were Osage and you owned the land and you also had children and you didn't have a car, then you probably walked to town to get your supplies, or at least took a wagon. And so there was a law in Oklahoma that the land that belonged to the descendants passed to the court. So they would get a court-appointed, what do you call those? Guardian, legal guardian. So what they would do is find out which Osage had just struck oil, and the two parents would die on the way to the grocery store, and the kids would get adopted not by what you think a guardian, but literally by the judges in Oklahoma. And then they would get the land. So that's the story I know. It doesn't look by your face that that's the story that you talked about.
No, that's accurate. I'm just cringing because it was on the record.
It is a horrid story, and you can see why this woo and all of that stuff. It really gets me, you know, because enough is enough. Shooting your parents is enough. Yes, sir.
Speaking of horror stories, are you familiar with the controversy about Elizabeth Warren?
I know that Donald Trump has a nickname for her.
Do you know anything more about it?
I actually do not. I had a perfect opportunity, I guess, to ask the chief, or his sister. Do you?
I got a related question.
I know. You know, I can answer this about it. This about as much as I know. She apparently claimed to be Cherokee. Now, I don't look like a Cherokee I imagine in your mind, and my brother does, and my mother did, very much. And I lost my point.
I have a related second question.
Oh, Pocahontas wasn't a Cherokee. that was my point. I mean, come on. So that Pocahontas thing that he's on.
Point about her fraud, but what do you make about somebody? Let's say she faked it. What would you say about that?
That's up to the college. There are. I don't carry it on me because I never want to lose it. But remember, I told you that my grandmother refused to sign the Pawnee roll. So at that point, my mother, instead of being, or her grandparents, I get lost, my grandfather at that point, that she didn't sign the tribal roll, it's called the Dawes Act, didn't sign the tribal roll. At that point, her offspring became 50% Pawnee. And so Elizabeth Warren, the way that this blood quantum level goes, there are 1,000 reasons to lose your blood quantum level. Another one of mine is that the Pawnees, if you're below a quarter, the Pawnees do not accept you if you're a member of another tribe. So I am not a member of the Pawnee tribe, even though I'm the same quantum level above, because I can't be.
This is my
So,
last,
so that's kind of, I mean, you'd really have to dig into to the law.
this is my last question. It should be very short.
Hank, she knows the answer before she hears it.
Go right now. It's related.
Yeah, it'd be good, somebody knew.
Elizabeth Warren didn't come out, you know, she let Donald Trump just go on and on about her being Pocahontas, but she did, go and get, I think it was 23andMe, had her DNA tested, and she was 20%, 30% Native Americans.
Yeah,
Very
you know, we're talking about DNA, you call it this has nothing to do with anything that we've talked about. Sorry? The Bering Strait theory, the idea that all American Indians are Chinese, because of DNA testing has, and I've said that for a long time because of what she said, social anthropology. You don't see Chinese artifacts laying around in Alaska. So if you haven't been finding that, then where did the Chinese go? And the answer is they didn't. And imagine this, when God created heaven and earth, He put people in all the continents. What a deal. So the Bering Strait theory is the idea that all American Indians are Chinese developments.
Did some of the laws that Indians get adopted into the legal framework of the United States?
Yes, the Iroquois Confederacy, there were 5, it's Mohawk, Iroquois, and I'm sorry, that's about as deep as I can go. They had their own constitution, and it literally was a bicameral democracy with an elected chief or a president, and they in particular, more than most tribes, had a whole constitution thing worked out. There is one of the slides I didn't include is a copy of the Cherokee Constitution from 80 in Cherokee. And yeah, we've been doing this government thing a long time. It's part of the tribal culture.
Okay, you know, you really made a big point of not typecasting Indians, and yet at the same time, we have this situation where even the chief you were pointing out is in another type of typecasting, which is a suit and a tie. And in fact, some say that comes from Masonic lore, and that shows he's part of another lodge. And I don't see where you're avoiding any kind of typecasting by adopting the typecasting of, you know, maybe what you consider acceptable Western wear here. And I guess, see, here's my example.
Is there a question?
Yeah, I'll make it into a question here. I went and I filmed Hopi Chief Thomas Banyaka.
Okay.
And this was at Thunderbird Lake because he wouldn't even wish to enter the town.
Hopis are
Now-
very, very exclusive.
Now see, now here I've got a little bit of a dichotomy here because you're talking about how everyone is culturally assimilated. And
I
I'm-
didn't say that.
Okay, well then recast what I'm saying, because I've been in Indian meetings where I was the only pale face there of over a dozen people.
Yeah.
And a lot of people in ceremonial dress. In fact, medicine man Tigre Perez took me through a warrior sweat. So, and I never saw him out of Indian dress.
I don't know where the question was.
The question is it seems like you're just trading, don't you think that's just trading, one standard of a typecast for another?
Oh, well, we all wear a costume. I mean, but to say that you are allowed to name a car the Cherokee and somehow that's supposed to be representative of Cherokee tribe, that's stereotype. And so are the ads that went along with the first Cherokee. And you know what? The car companies don't do that now.
I had a little follow-up question.
Sure.
So aside from, legalities, do you know, or do you have an idea how much Indian blood you have in yourself?
Quarter. And Cherokee, and would be an eighth Pawnee. Yeah, except for my grandmother. And they don't allow what's called dual citizenship, like the United States. My mother, I do have a cute story about that. My mother, back about 1965 maybe, I was probably in the 5th grade, that'd be about right. And we drove to Pawnee. There is a Pawnee, Oklahoma, and the roundhouse is there. And the Pawnees are one of the lucky tribes, so to speak. They actually did settle for the state of Nebraska a few $1 million. And they divided that amongst the citizens. So they had a tribal meeting about whether to build a school, whether to distribute it to the people, or whether to build medical facilities, what to do with the money. And my mother, I used to be even more pale than I am now, and when I was a kid, and my mother left me in the car. She was afraid they weren't going to let her vote if I was sitting beside her. She took my brother in. I told you he had very dark black hair, very dark. His nickname was Chief at the Naval Academy, unfortunately. Anybody else? Yeah, we really didn't get into mascots much. We kind of wandered into American Indian
Gary,
history.
what is the process then for changing the mascot? I mean, what legally do you need to do?
Thank you. There are cities, and just like the Dallas ISD, it's kind of like gay equal rights. I hate to give it a similarity to anything, but the quickest thing that I can tell you, it's a lot like gay civil rights, that it has to kind of be done by the city. Let's say the city of, I don't know where Washington Redskins play, but let's say that city adopted a resolution not to allow filming of sports teams with Indian slurs as their logo. Then that shut that down quick. And Austin has done that, Seattle has done it. There are about, it's not a dream, there are about 30 cities now. It's happening so fast all around the country that I can't keep track of it. Dallas is not one of them. There's enough to talk about in Dallas. But it's obviously going to be done more at the local level. It can be done by copyright infringement, which is how the tribes that have sued the Redskins. The problem, I don't know enough about law, but you have to have standing to sue, meaning that you have to be a Redskin to sue somebody else for using your, and the people that are suing are obviously not Redskins, they're whatever they are, Penobscots or something, from the Northeast. So the problem there becomes that. And I would also say, the comment about casinos, I would also say that one of you got to remember that I think the number is 1/8 of the money that's made in Indian casinos goes to Indians. About half of it goes to politicians who are lobbyists. And that's the purpose. If you ever wondered, why did that proliferate so fast? The answer is because it's very, very profitable to the politicians, and the Indians don't get much.
now it's your turn to talk, so whoever wants to be first, you get to speak for or against what the speaker, it's, come on up here.
Okay, well, I was a Boy Scout growing up from about 11 to 18, plus I was a scout leader, and in that organization, we had what was called the Order of the Arrow. And that was not meant to denigrate Indians in any way. That was meant to honor our Indian heritage, and we were encouraged to study Indian lore, to develop an understanding of the Indians that lived here before us. So I don't see how that would be denigrating to Indians. I mean, the whole object was to honor Indians, or honor our Indian heritage anyway. Aside from that, if you do some research on what was going on this continent before the Europeans got here, Nigel Davies, who wrote a book on human sacrifice, says there was a continent-wide war going on with tribes killing each other back and forth, committing human sacrifice and various other god-awful things to each other. If you research the Aztecs, when the conquistadors got here, they found rows upon rows of hundreds of thousands of human skulls on poles. And the Aztecs had a habit of sacrificing children and people alive while they would cut their heart out and eat it while the person was alive. Not a real nice practice. And there were very similar things going on the North American continent. So to develop an idea that Native Americans were these lily white noble savages that always did the right thing is a completely false picture. And what Nigel Davies says in his book is that when the Europeans got here, that continent-wide war ended. So there's no lack of sin on both sides. There were a few tribes that were generally peaceful and didn't bother other people so much, but they tended to get wiped out by tribes that were aggressive, and there were plenty of those. So the point being that there's no lack of wrongdoing, no matter which side you want to look at. But to get the idea that Indians never did anything wrong and the white man committed all the wrongs is completely false. It's just not true.
Well, that was a point well taken, and it's one that I would have made, but thank you very much. Can you get this up any higher? I'm going to try to stick to a couple of notes so I don't go. There are 500 and some odd tribes in the United States. Can you imagine, since they're tribal, just like we all were in our origins in Europe and in Asia, in Africa, wherever we came from, wherever our forefathers came from and foremothers came from, we were all tribal. Like for example, Germany was not put together as a country until, what was it, the late 1800s. So I would just say this. I admire the Native Indians. I respect the Native Indians, the Native Americans. And I wish to do things to honor them, not to degrade them. Some of us could actually feel guilt for what some of our forefathers did to the Native Americans when our forefathers first came here from Northern Europe and began to colonize the United States and began to go to war and displace tribes and did some pretty dirty things. It's not much different than reading European history. If you just go back and read English history and see what the kings of England all did to each other, and all the rulers of Rome did to each other, it's about as bad as you can get. This is an opinion. The images we see associated with anything that is identified with Native American, they're what you would call a caricature. They're not intended to be reproductions. In other words, who is it? The Cleveland Indians, who agreed to take the red logo off. Now, that was a caricature. Could anybody look at that and say that that represented in their mind's eye their image of a Native American? I just don't think so. It's not a reproduction. It does not carry over what the children are exposed to in the school with respect to their team mascot, whether they're bears or cougars or redskins. Does not carry over into some attitude in their adult life that is denigrating to any of the humans or the animals that are adopted as their mascots. You know, no, in my opinion, no equity in a lot of ways is the sin of us as whiteskins who came to this country through ancestry to those who were native here. If there were 500 and some odd tribes and they were all at each other, I just can't imagine that we were at them any worse or less than they were at each other. I have a question. If you were the person in a school deciding on having a mascot, would you choose a mascot of some animal or person that you looked down on? You want the team to be elevated in its image. So I would think that would be the goal, the hopeful output and result of what you do when you choose that. I have a son-in-law who's a Sioux Indian, and he's of the sub-tribe that was part of obliterating Custer in his last stand from South Dakota. So I managed to get a little bit of hands-on. He grew up with no English skills. He acquired them and he learned them. I'd love to have had him here tonight. I should have done that. Let me tell my Washington Redskins story. As all of you know who come to this meeting regularly, I'm a prolific reader. Does that mean everything I read is always right? Well, heck no. All kinds of people write things, and I read them. And I'll read Paul Krugman on his left-wing economics, and I'll read Thomas Sowell on his far right-wing economics. And then I make up my mind what I think is something sensible. It's usually somewhere in between those two positions. This is my recollection of the story of the Washington Redskins. A lady from New Mexico filed a complaint against the Washington Redskins. She even got one of the federal agencies to withdraw one of the benefits, which is not too significant, from the Washington Redskins. Of course, anytime you go and do anything out in public view, what happens? You get investigated right down to the bottom level. Well, she was in New Mexico. Her children were going to schools that had Native American team names, just like the Washington Redskins. it began to smell a little hypocritic. Well, they went back and talked to the team owner. The team owner, this is his description of what he did. When he decided to name the team, he went and brought a group of tribal leaders together. A small group out of that 500 and some odd tribals. How would you draw all those together? You wouldn't, you couldn't. But he brought a group of them together and he said, look guys, I'd like to do something to honor your group. What would you think about this? And they approved it, 100%. And many people who are Native Americans, 100%, take the opposite viewpoint of our speaker tonight. Do I think that makes our speaker tonight wrong? No, not at all. He is as entitled to his viewpoint and his reaction to our use of the word as any of us are entitled to any viewpoint we have. But I am personally offended by anything that is accusatory of a thoughtless or negative viewpoint about something that is not. I would say one thing in closing, and that's to repeat. Why in the holy daisies would anybody go out and name their school something they thought was derogatory? It's a compliment, it's an uplift, and it probably has guilt threaded into it from taking the land and moving the Native Americans and killing so many of them. Thank you very much. Watch your toes, man. I don't get it.
I'd like to thank the speaker for his presentation tonight, and, you know, we always see things from where we are. And it's, some people may see that what he indicated was inconsistent with what you see in the image. They may be the same, but he made a statement earlier that all Native Americans tribes don't think alike. And it's just like all African Americans, we're all over the place. And all white people, they don't think alike either. So it depends on where you sit in, on how you see something. And I can relate to some of the things he made. You know, if it seems that we have a propensity to demonize, and what strikes me is if it hadn't been for the Native Americans and the first colonists, you know, they would have starved to death. Right. They taught them how to grow and survive in this country, and then they took the land. And so some people use those images to justify what our ancestors did. And the gentleman that preceded me, you know, one of the big problems I think in Africa today is the tribal system. Yep. Because it's not, the tribe is only concerned about the tribe in that tribe. That's how they was able to get slaves, because that tribe had been defeated. They didn't want to fight them again, so they helped the United States get the slaves out. So and if you study, like I said, Germany didn't become a country until after Bismarck and things like that. And they were pretty primitive too. So we all came from tribe. I think my concern is that if a word is felt demonizing by one group, by another group, I would try to find another word. That's my opinion. And I know that we try to name schools, but I look at the situation with like Robert E. Lee's statue was downtown Dallas and created some controversy when they removed it. And Robert E. Lee was probably one of the most brilliant generals that ever graduated at that time from West Point. Grant was not. He was kind of like one of the senators we had, whose parents were John McCain. He graduated near the bottom, but Grant was a good general. That's who won the Civil War, is Grant. So Robert E. Lee could have been general of the Northern Army if he'd accepted, but he didn't want to, and he was specifically concerned about Virginia. He didn't want to do much to protect Virginia, I guess. And but to me, it's part of our history, but it's a part of history we need to learn something from, and not do that anymore. Just because a person is black, or a Native American, or a woman, or gay, lesbian, they're still people. And our Constitution says that. Equal protection, due process of law. And that's what we all ought to have. And I don't think we were right by treating, because when they found that the people had a land that Indians live on, you don't really have reservation, as I understand it, in Oklahoma, as you have in other states. And it's one we have in Texas between Louisville, Woodville, and Livingston, is a Texas reservation. It's a state reservation, not a federal reservation. And so they have to have a certain amount of blood to be considered American Indian. And that's some of the things we need to think about. You know, is it that important to hurt someone else, to use this word? And you know, I've felt that in my socialization in the United States. We all should try to, we're not gonna always be one, but we're all in this together. And as I reiterate time and time again, if we can't get beyond some little petty stuff and deal with the real issues, then our country is gonna be more and more like it seems to be going right now. We need to get beyond that and try to find common ground. And the Constitution gives the citizen the right to elect people to office. We have some people try to limit that, but that's inconsistent with our Constitution. So I understand what you're saying, and I understand what the speaker before me said. I mean, it's a perception we have, and it may be a different perception. Maybe we need to get to talk and understand it. Thank you.
Well, I have a lot of thoughts that are really kind of a mixture, and it's kind of hard to put it all together into one coherent statement. But I've had a different experience in that most of the Indians, and I mean, I lived for many years up in Oklahoma, and most of the Indians that I had dealings with were fairly proud of their Indian tradition and had no problem being traditional. And that would be Thomas Banyaga of the Hopi Indians, the Hopi Indian chief, James Wapapa of the Kickapoo tribe, and then I personally had dealings with Medicine Man Tigre Perez, and I can't even tell you what tribe specifically he was. I know it was from Mexico, but the upshoot of it is I mean, I'm trying to, I have this crazy girlfriend who wants me to get involved in American Indian lore and ritual and all this, so I'm out doing sweat lodges and vision quests and everything, and getting pretty heavy into it. And she wasn't even an Indian; she was a white girl. And then I did have an Indian girlfriend when I was up in Oklahoma. She was part Creek, part Choctaw, I think, Choctaw Creek.
They're right next to each other.
And so, you know, I look at that whole deal, and I would say this, is I think that it's a very deep well when you start having sensitivities that you're going to get outraged over. There's a long way to go there before you hit the bottom of that well. And I don't know what's appropriate. I'm not going to tell you what's appropriate, because that's really your personal business. But what I see you recommending is basically legislating for all of us here. And I would just give a reminder that there's something called the First Amendment. And one of those uncomfortable things about free speech is that it's the free speech you don't want to hear that really defines that liberty. Is when we start legislating for others and saying, you can't say this, you can't say that, then I mean, where does it stop, and when do we start even losing our history in the sense of where we have been? And I think another danger from kind of the mascot logo position here is my Indian girlfriend up in Oklahoma had some very serious issues in her life from Bureau of Indian Affairs. And I mean, if you were just going to look at it, it's kind of hard to puzzle out, but it looked like what happened is she had a few children, she went in for some medical procedure, somehow they screwed her up, and then they sterilized her. And you start looking at some of these programs, some of the orphanages, and especially up Canada's got a horrible record of the Indians up there, where you're just seeing really this kind of common maltreatment of the indigenous tribes. And what's happening to them medically, what's happening to them in other regards. I know you don't hear this on the main news, but I'm up in Oklahoma looking at a little publication from some of the local tribes there, and they said, well, the Bureau of Indian Affairs just lost $11 million in oil lease money that was supposed to go to us, and they don't know where they misplaced it. And that was already like 5 years ago when it had started, and they're just saying, we don't know where it is, and we can't find it for you. Who would tolerate that? That's our government doing that to the Indian tribes. And I am concerned that these serious abuses are getting covered up by maybe things that account for appearance and so forth on a much less level. And I can see your argument. Maybe that's as important as these other things, and maybe we'll get to the other considerations. But and my vote is for the First Amendment. And as a white man, I mean, I've never heard of anybody doing knockout game on other blacks, but I certainly have heard of knockout game going on right down at the West End where youth get together, they go around and knock out white guys. And I've been around when some of that has been going on. And I've been called whitey, I've been called, cracker, I've been called a lot of things. But then usually people who are calling that call each other worse, so, I mean, but anyway, I'm just, I'm trying to say, I guess, don't be quite so sensitive on the level of mascots, and let's get down to what is actually being done to some of these groups, because I think that's where the real issue is there.
Amen. Amen.
I guess I'm part Cherokee myself, probably 1/4 or 1/8, I'm not sure. My grandfather was, I think, half, and my great-grandfather was named Prince. So, he supposedly owned a lot of land in East Texas that he lost because it had oil on it. Somehow he got cheated out of it. But that's what I've been told. Of course, our family didn't really try to keep the culture going. You know, when you're only a small percentage of something, it's like, you don't really have that impetus to go after, keeping up with the cultural traditions of your past. And maybe because of the stereotypes against Indians, you probably don't have the impetus to actually maintain those ties to your past culture because it's looked down upon. And so maybe I'd have a totally different outlook about that culture had it not been completely looked down upon and eradicated. And like I mentioned earlier with regards to how it seemed like the Vatican was had a conquest motive in mind that was to drum out all those of different faiths. Like if they could conquer America, they want to completely convert all the Indians to Catholicism, which they kind of did that in South America quite a bit. And so I think that had a lot of motivation on one end. Of course, it's like if they can't get you with religion or military, then they'll get you financially. You know, there's the three cities that are independent city-states of Washington, London, and Rome. But they seem to work in conjunction with each other to try to conquer the world. And it's all about conquest, really, because they're dominating the world. And so if your culture gets wiped out, hey, get along with it. You know, don't rock the boat. The world's a better place right now. But yet the indigenous people, they were there first, and they weren't trying to go around conquering other nations. You didn't see the Indians go into Europe and try to invade Europe. It's the other way around. And so, you know, they don't get the credit for a lot of the things that have developed in our society, like he was mentioning the Constitution of the Iroquois. That's a pretty big factor in the development of Western civilization. But as far as the mascot issue goes, yeah, we do have bigger problems than mascots, I think. But if somebody's upset about something like a mascot, you always have to put yourself in the other guy's shoe and feel like, what would it be if they did that to you, and you know, see how it feels that way, and then you probably don't disagree with them. You probably agree with their way of looking at things. Yeah, it could be looked at as an honor, but given the history of the word redskin, I doubt that it could possibly be considered honorable by the redskin people. Because it was basically a term used by people that were assassinating, hunting you down and killing you and taking your scalp as a trophy, or as a ticket stub for getting paid for having killed that person by, you know, for the bounty on them. That's what it sounded like to me.
Speaker also. This is a tough group to get before and share. brave, can I say brave person to do that. And by way of anecdotes, when I was growing up, my mother told me that we had some Indian blood, and I was thrilled to death. And you know, I'm a product of the South, so I have all these stereotypes in my background. And a Yankee, another stereotype, came to our school, moved down here and came to our school, and I told her, and she said, oh, I can see that, you have high cheekbones, and I was thrilled again, you know. And then I found out later on that my mother was mistaken, because her aunt that she dearly loved, my great aunt, was, her father was Indian, And so the blood was in the in-laws. It was not in my family's blood, in my bloodline, but it was in the in-laws. And I found pictures of him on the internet, and he looks like what, features. I would guess he was an Indian. I became totally absorbed with this topic when I read that book, Killers of the Flower Moon, and I have it on my phone. I have the book on my phone, and the name is there. But I agree with Calvin about if it offends somebody, why use it? And it's not the issue of the mascot itself, it's the hurt behind it. And at times, I felt like I could perceive that hurt in our speaker tonight. There's hurt there, and we did have laws against Native Americans. That book is very detailed. It was on the New York Times bestseller list for months. And it is very documented. It's an extremely good book. Killers of the Osage Moon, The Birth of the FBI. And you can find it all over the place. I got it on Kindle, but you can find it all over the place right now. It's very popular. And what astounded me was the Indians had been moved further and further west, and they thought, well, we'll pick this one place of land because it was real rocky, and they thought nobody else will want this, so they'll leave us alone there. Well, it turned out it was on top of oil. And they were so wealthy that where one American in 11 would have a car, the Osage Indians would have 11 cars. They were that wealthy, and it was killing the people, the pale faces. And systematically, they murdered many of them. It's just an unbelievable story. And what he said about the guardians, they gave them ridiculous laws, like the guardian would have to approve what kind of toothpaste an Indian woman bought. I mean, it was that ridiculous. They treated them like they were infants or something. It was just horrible. But I got such an appreciation of Indians from reading that book, because I actually went up to Oklahoma and I planned to spend some more time up there. Ponca City was a lot of settled there. That's in their county, Osage County. And there's beautiful buildings there, old, quaint buildings. They were so highly educated. They had people from France come over to educate them. They had all this money. And their high school is enormous. It's a beautiful building, enormous, highly educated people, speaking several languages. I don't know, just culture beyond anything I ever imagined. And to see what they had gone through, to see the murders and how they were treated, and then to turn around and put it into something beautiful was what was impressive to me. And Bartlesville, Texas, Pawhuska, Oklahoma, thank you. Pawhuska they're there now. And I went up there, and a relative of mine went, and she said, this is a real stereotype too, she said, I went to Oklahoma and I didn't see any Indians there. So the thing about educating, when we in the schools, we have African American History Month, you can buy posters of all these famous African American people, put them up in the hall, put them up in the room, kids can study them. They have coloring books for little kids with all these famous from the past and present, but we don't have that. I never saw that at the time I was teaching for American Indians. I never saw any of that. So that would be, we just don't know. Like, I would not have known that our speaker was an American Indian by looking. And we don't know all of the Americans that are out there, which is ignorance on our part. And I don't know how they can't go around wearing a red band on their arm or something, you know. But there's been talks recently on the radio about musicians, and people have no idea how many musicians are African American rock musicians, drummers, famous drummers. And then I started listening to music, and I thought, I can hear that in there. And they're saying that it's part of the jazz, part of the influence on jazz as well, is the American drummers that are out there. So anyway, but like the final thing about the mascots, if the American Psychiatric Association says that it's harmful, why would we do it?
Sorry. Okay, so I just had to come to this one. Oklahoma, Ponca, Illinois, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Allegheny, Ontario, Ottawa. We got every mountain and a river and state and city is almost a Indian name. So that's another thing about where do we end with this stuff. Now, as far as getting off into the point about abusing the Indians, which we get from history, there's no debate about that. Everybody accepts that. It's interesting about histories. I don't trust them that much, but the only history that, to me, is shows a great sign of maturity that it admits to really bad things. It's more of looks like more of an honest history is the white man's history. You got your black history, your women's history, you got your Indian history. They're all good. But this is the dominant culture, and I think part of it is because it's more objective, and the history is more objective. And we know all these bad things that have happened. Now, as far as stereotyping, why am I responsible for that? That's another point. Well, the reason I'm talking, you really can't argue too much with your point. You don't like it, I think you have some standing. I don't know, 1/4 that makes you an Indian. I think you're here today, in one sense, because of the general movement of victimology. That's why I'm up here talking. Because unwittingly, a lot of our liberal friends, especially of our age, have been sucked into some modern movements that are not so kosher. I actually looked at some of this stuff, and it has to do with postmodernism and just this idea that we're going to not use logic. Now, how can you say you're not into stereotypes? To me, the thing about being a white man being stereotyped, it's unbelievable. The whole thing about making quotas by race, having hate crimes by race, by whoever's got the most power, most influence with the governments seems to just go for their particular little tribal thing. And I don't know how many transgenders there are, but they sure take up a lot more of the airspace and the news space than there are. I think it's 0.03% or something. And I just see this as part of that. This is what I'm trying to say. And that's what bothers me. I think we're into a movement, and I copied down some of the things, they call it the cultural Marxism. The old Marxism failed because it was going to be class workers, and then the workers did not unite. It failed when the people fought like for their country instead of for the workers. So they remodeled. They didn't go away. They remodeled themselves to just divide us along different lines. And you're an identity group. You're an Indian. I don't know why you're an Indian. I mean, what am I? I prefer to be called American. I mean, am I Hungarian? Am I Polish? Am I German? What am I? I'm me. And that's the thing that's kind of a little shaky. Like you really said, the individual is really
interesting, great thing, and it's hallowed in the Constitution. And yet, you're fitting in with this identity politics, which I think is really going to hurt us as a nation. Now, there's a small point. You said there's no famous team that's not an animal or an Indian, and you took umbrage to that. And other people say, well, they're honoring them. But at the same time, you reminded me that the 49ers are neither an animal or an Indian. And they're being honored. So you're the one who even brought that up. You don't see that as that's a minor point.
Giants.
The
Giants.
The Giants.
There you go.
Well, I don't like them. Anyways, so here's the thing. The modern thing is for the what we call the left, and the Democratic Party is being sucked into this further and further. And I really think the people here are not really wanting to go as far as what I'm seeing so much of. What was I going to say? I'll remember as soon as I sit down. Yes.
What about Elizabeth Warren's DNA?
I don't care about her. Anyway, we're being pulled into more grandiose Marxist stuff, and I think it's not good. So it's a victimology thing, and we're being told to identify by our group identities that other people make for us. I mean, I tell you, when I meet a person, the first thing I don't try to classify them according to the leftist identity groups. If I'm playing music, I wonder how good they are at that. If I'm doing business, I wonder how reliable they are. On and on. It's way down the list for me to see whether they're gay or woman. It depends. Now, the woman maybe, it depends what I'm trying to do. But
Get the instruction.
I don't even know what he said, but I'm laughing. I just better get out of here because I'm getting too senile here.
I guess I'm the last one standing.
I don't think anybody dares get back up.
And I want to thank our speaker. I think he did a terrific job here. The main thing is we all got thinking, and he got us all thinking. And he brought up some things that none of us knew, which means we learned something. And more or less, we learned to get along with each other better. One thing that I have to disagree with slightly is that he brought up about we're not Chinese, so the Indian nation didn't come from that area. But if you go back in history and look DNA and everything, if there's anything to it, it goes all the way back to Africa. And everybody here is one big family. And it grew from there, and it spread around the world. It went across the Bering Strait when that was land. And that's what history predicts. That's what it shows. Anyway, I disagree with that if you want, but that's one view to point out. If nothing else, we're all part of the human race. We ought to understand that and get along with each other. So that's our identity politics should be that we're all human and that we're all related somewhere way back. And if you understand that, a lot of divisiveness goes away, and that's something that. And now another piece of divisiveness, not that it matters, I'll just bring it up, is that whenever, I've been a big arguer about the fact that automation replaces people with machines don't pay taxes, and that whenever the economy goes bad, there's always a rise of a lunatic fringe, because then we're always denigrating somebody else. That's what happens. People start denigrating each other, start denigrating those that are not as well off as they are. And if you look at the Indian nation today, part of my expression of using the word Indian, but 500 tribes, or 580 tribes, and you can see that in a lot of cases they're not doing as well because they don't have the education. A lot of things didn't happen. They got denigrated, and we need to repair that. And we should all learn something from this and try to get along with each other and try to help each other. That's my view. Anyway, thank you. And our speaker gets the last word.
How much time
should mention
Whatever you
what you
want.
mentioned the other day about the Hawaiians and how their oil or how their
Yeah, you got 10 minutes anyway.
Okay.
It's 9 o'clock.
Okay, you guys threw out about 30 things. I want to, congratulate, two people. One that said that she had been traveling in Oklahoma from place to place and that she had seen culture beyond belief. It's the point. That's the point. You don't put it on a football helmet. So you get 1 star for the night. It's 1 gold star. And the other wasn't meant to be an argument against mascots, but I believe your word was you took umbrage with me saying that they're not all fishes and birds and the New York Giants and San Francisco 49ers, they're not porpoises. And I agree. We don't have to name them Indians. We can find lots of things that are other choices other than to denigrate somebody with a cartoon character or a tomahawk in their hand or a buckskin dress. One of the first comments made was about Boy Scouts and the Order of the Arrow and that stuff. And I have to admit, I've had asthma my whole life, and so I just didn't get the chance to do that stuff. I was sick all the time. Still am today. So one of the neat things about what you said was I mentioned the book, Everything You Learned About Indians Is Wrong. And you know, you've heard that beautiful poem by Chief Seattle. How do you own the sky? I don't have it memorized, but how does a man own the sky? How does a man ever stop the water from flowing? All of that stuff. It's attributed to Chief Seattle. And here's the game. Somebody else mentioned colonization and Christianization. You know who wrote that beautiful poem? St. Francis of Assisi. A long time ago. And he was a dreamer like that, right? He liked all that stuff. And they attributed it to Chief Seattle because the missionaries used it in advertising pieces to get people to give them money to go out and save the Indians. So that was their business, so to speak, and they did it. You know, kind of missing the point. All night, I worried about whether you were a good class or not. and I'm not sure you got the point that I was trying to make, but I'll say it again. I just think that mascots are denigrating. I can give you a story. My brother and I have not had a very close relationship. I went up to Idaho and spent a week with him last summer, fishing. And time of my life, he's very, very dark, especially right now, because he's a sheriff on one of the deepest lakes in America. And he said, you know, this thing about, he brought it up, I didn't. He said, this thing about Indian mascots, he goes, I don't know why anybody has a problem with that. Somebody else mentioned these little towns, I don't even know the name of them, in Oklahoma. And there are a lot of African American little tiny enclaves where there'll be one church, and that's the church that all 7 people that live there go to. Seriously. And so So I lost my train of thought. Yep. Oh, tribal. So you, the Irish, my mother's father, yeah, I don't know, grandfather maybe, McDowell, and a lot of the, I just heard this story a week ago from the chief. I didn't know it. Somebody said a bunch of tribal people, and that's fact. And Irish in particular were coming to America to be soldiers, and they saw what was happening to tribal people, but they were tribal. If you know much about Ireland, it's still tribal. And so they identified, and they very quickly integrated into especially the Cherokee Nation, and were often the soldiers that brought them over. Somebody also mentioned that there was war everywhere, and I'm like, and Genghis Khan and the Crusades, and I mean, like that was anything uncommon for humans, and that for some reason that's an excuse to go ahead and call the Washington Redskins Washington Redskins. I'm not sure how that logic fits together. The first Thanksgiving, your story that you've heard, and I haven't studied the story in all honesty because I don't know that I want to know it. But the tribe that invited the pilgrims to dinner, it wasn't their idea, and they didn't live. The next day they were gone. So it's like if you invited yourself to your next door neighbor's house and then decided you needed their land the next day. So that cute story about Thanksgiving, it's a great story. But it's not real like a lot of these, and that's almost the reason that I think that this getting rid of mascots matters so much. I love it when you said it all depends on where you sit, and I have a saying that is, I do remember what I was going to say about my brother. I have a saying, and I made it up a long time ago, what you see depends on where you are when you look. And when you're not against the river, you can't see that it's full of fish. And you can't think you can feed yourself. Or you've had it happen. You see a group of people quarter a mile away, and you know your brain goes to work, and you stereotype them, and then they get near you, and you're like, God, was I wrong? I could tell you a story about a mission trip to Mexico. Scared me to death. I heard wild music, and I was like, oh my gosh, we're going to a bar out in the middle of nowhere, and these people are all drunk, and they were evangelical Christians. and they were on fire. But I was in the back of a pickup, and I was scared to death. So my brothers, what you see depends on where you are when you look. And he said where you sit. My brother said, I don't have a problem with this mascot stuff. He goes, I don't know where people are getting all this worry about that mascot stuff from. And my brother was president of 3 companies. He had the honor of graduating from the Naval Academy. I'm pretty proud of him. He's a little smarter than me, and I'm fine with that. But he didn't get that point. What you see depends on where you are when you look. Well, his kids, one of them looks very Indian, and the other doesn't, like me and him. And I said, that's because your kids grew up in a 3-story house in Marietta, Georgia, and you were president of the corporation. And your kids didn't have to be followed to school. Somebody mentioned the word cracker. You didn't have to be followed to school by the other guys on the football team going, hey, dirty Indian, what'd you have to drink last night? You know, what casino you gonna work at when you grow up? And that, I mentioned the small towns, that goes on today. So to call a team the Indians depends on what you see, where you are when you look. The biggest problem I have is with the cartoonization. If there was a good way to do it, an honorable way to do it, around here, the Waxahachie Indians, I don't know the story, but I'm not so sure. That one kind of plugs in, if the story is true. The story of the Redskin owner is not true. So I have to tell you, I last time I taught was in HEB, and this is we've talked about the First Amendment and some of that stuff, and every day people say that they don't have prayer time in schools anymore, and that's not true. It's state law, 1 minute every day, every school. So that's a myth. And you also say the Pledge of Allegiance. And I hear people every day say, well, they don't do that anymore. So those kids don't know it. Yes, they do. They stand up. The teacher makes them stand up. Somebody leads it, and it's done every day. But I can tell you that a modern classroom, looking at it, people, gosh, in HEB, any classroom I had probably had people from 12 different countries in it, and they're just kids. And you're teaching them this thing, liberty and justice for all. And I can tell you, when I got to that part of the pledge, I stopped. The last 2 or 3 years I taught because I knew better. I knew that I couldn't look at those kids and tell them that they were going to get the same respect that somebody else was, if they were Muslim or if they were Mexican. And it's the same thing with Indians. I don't know if there's a way to end it except just to say that I want you to get the point that it's the insinuation that Indians are cute little puppies, and they need to be put on advertising, and that's the part that gets me. And everybody doesn't have a problem with it. My brother didn't have a problem with it, and probably some chiefs don't have a problem with it because they're getting kickbacks from those casinos, and some of their problems have gone away. So you mentioned getting them all together. There's the same mechanisms at work there as there is everywhere else, and greed is one of them, and suddenly we all get along. So I think that about does it. Maybe you were a great class.
Well, that's it for tonight. They kick us out of here at 10:30. Our speaker is willing to stick around here to talk to them, but the formal part of this meeting's over. So see you next week.